You've entered void of rules, a realm where normal constraints cease to exist. But beware, traveller, there is one rule here. You've got to hit subscribe. Seriously, it's the only rule we have. We just reached 1,000 brave souls, and we're hunting for 9,000 more to complete our dark ritual. I mean, reach our next goal, so subscribe. Or don't. But remember, the void remembers those who defy the only rule. Now let's get into today's video. My name is Daniel Cross, and I thought I'd hit the jackpot when the Avalon Continental called me back within hours of applying. This wasn't just any hotel. It was a 52-story monument to old New York money, where presidents had slept and movie stars hid from paparazzi. The lobby alone cost more than most people's houses, all black marble and gold fixtures that gleamed like they were still wet from some celestial rain. I'd been job hunting for 3 months after my previous employer downsized their entire night audit department. The Avalon Continental wasn't just offering employment, they were offering salvation wrapped in a salary that seemed too good to be true. The building itself commanded respect from the moment you approached its Art Deco facade. Brass doors reached towards the sky like cathedral windows, and the doormen wore uniforms that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But something felt wrong during my interview with director Elena Vasquez. She kept glancing at an ornate clock on her mahogany desk, its brass pendulum swinging with hypnotic precision. The office was decorated with photographs spanning decades, the hotel hosting charity galas, celebrity weddings, political fundraisers. Yet in every image, Elena appeared unchanged, as if time had forgotten to touch her. When I mentioned my previous hotel experience managing night shifts at smaller establishments, she cut me off mid-sentence like I'd said something offensive. Her manicured fingers drummed against the desk surface, creating a rhythm that matched the pendulum's swing. "Experience doesn't matter here," she said, sliding a thick contract across the desk. The paper felt expensive under my fingertips, heavy and cream-coloured with embossed letterhead that seemed to shimmer in the lamplight. "What matters is following instructions exactly as given. Can you do that, Mr. Cross?" The question hung in the air between us like incense, heavy with implications I couldn't quite grasp. Through the office windows I could see Manhattan, stretching endlessly in all directions, a concrete jungle where opportunities like this were rarer than unicorns. The salary was double what I'd expected for night audit work, triple what I'd been making at my last job. I signed before reading the fine print, my pen scratching across the signature line, with what felt like finality. The ink seemed to sink into the paper with unusual darkness, as if the document was drinking it. Elena smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Those steel-grey orbs held secrets that could fill libraries, and something told me I was about to become one of them. "Excellent. You start Wednesday night at 11 p.m. sharp. Don't be late." The next few days passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. I researched everything I could about the Avalon Continental, diving deep into its history and reputation. The hotel had been built in 1928 during the height of the Jazz Age, when money flowed like champagne and dreams seemed achievable for anyone bold enough to chase them. The architecture was a masterpiece of Art Deco design, with geometric patterns carved into limestone facades and lobby ceilings that soared like cathedral vaults. Famous guests had included everyone from Charlie Chaplin to John F. Kennedy, and the guest registry read like a who's who of American royalty. Yet, for all its prestige, I noticed gaps in the hotel's documented history. Entire years seemed missing from online records, particularly around 1949. When I tried to dig deeper, I found only vague references to renovations and modernization projects that seemed to coincide with these mysterious blank periods. My first shift started exactly as scheduled. Elena met me in the marble-floored lobby, her heels clicking against the stone with each measured step. The sound echoed off the vaulted ceiling like a metronome. keeping time for some cosmic symphony only she could hear. She handed me a burgundy leather journal that felt warm to the touch, like it had been sitting in sunlight for hours. The leather was soft and worn, clearly handled by many people before me. "These are your nightly protocols," she said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The lobby's acoustics made even quiet sounds carry, and I found myself leaning closer to catch every word. "Memorize them, live by them, never question them." I opened the journal, expecting standard hotel procedures about security rounds and guest services. The pages were thick parchment that rustled like autumn leaves, and the text was written in elegant cursive handwriting that belonged to another era. Instead of mundane protocols, I found 10 rules that made my skin crawl, just reading them. Rule 1, room 847, must receive a bottle of 1952 champagne every night at 11:45 p.m. Knock 3 times, leave it outside the door, and walk away immediately without looking back. Do not attempt to see who retrieves the bottle. Rule 2, if you hear children laughing from the pool area after midnight, immediately go to the lobby and turn on every single light. Do not investigate the source of the laughter. Do not look toward the pool area until the laughing stops completely. Rule 3, never enter the Rose Garden restaurant between 2:17 a.m. and 2:23 a.m. Not for any reason, not even for emergencies. If you must pass by during these times, walk quickly and do not look through the windows. Rule 4, if a guest asks about the penthouse suite, tell them it's being fumigated indefinitely. Do not elaborate or provide alternative accommodations. Change the subject as quickly as possible. Rule 5. The phone at the concierge desk will ring at 1:33 a.m. every night. Answer with the words Avalon Continental, 1949, and hang up immediately after the caller finishes speaking. Do not engage in conversation. Rule 6. Never look up at the ceiling in the main corridor after 3 a.m. Keep your eyes forward or downward at all times when walking through this area. If you must traverse the corridor, count your steps to maintain focus. Rule 7. If you see a bellhop wearing a grey uniform, understand that he doesn't work for this hotel. Offer him a glass of water and he will leave peacefully. Do not ask his name or attempt conversation. Rule 8. The freight elevator to the parking garage must be operated manually between midnight and dawn. The automatic controls do not function properly during these hours. Use only the manual override switches. Rule 9. If all the clocks in the lobby stop simultaneously, stand perfectly still, wherever you are, until they restart. Do not move a muscle. Do not speak. Do not even breathe loudly until time resumes its normal flow. Rule 10. Blood will appear on the marble floor every Thursday at 2:44 a.m. Clean it immediately using the special solution kept in the janitor's closet on the basement level. Work quickly but thoroughly. The stain must be completely removed before dawn. Elena watched my face as I read, studying my expression like she was trying to gauge how quickly I might run screaming into the night. My hands trembled slightly as I turned the pages, taking in each bizarre instruction. The rules felt less like employee guidelines and more like incantations designed to keep some terrible force at bay. "Questions?" she asked, though her tone suggested that questions would not be welcome. I had 1,000 questions burning in my throat like acid. Why these specific rules? What happened if they weren't followed? Who had worked here before me? And where were they now? But something in her steel grey eyes made me shake my head. She nodded approvingly and handed me a heavy ring of keys that jingled like wind chimes in a storm. "Bobby Hendricks will train you for the first 2 weeks. He's been working nights here for 23 years. Listen to everything he tells you, and remember, some knowledge comes with a price." The keys felt cold in my palm, each one worn smooth by decades of use. Some were modern, designed for electronic locks and security systems. Others looked antique, crafted from brass that had developed a green patina with age. One key in particular caught my attention. It was larger than the others, made from black metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. My trainer turned out to be a 60-year-old chain smoker with yellowed fingers and a perpetual wheeze that rattled in his chest like loose change. Bobby Hendricks had the weathered appearance of a man who'd seen too much and learned to accept it as the natural order of things. His uniform was immaculate despite its obvious age, pressed and cleaned with military precision. "First thing you gotta understand about this place," Bobby said as we walked the marble corridors during my initial training shift, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "The Avalon Continental ain't just a hotel. It's a monument to things that should have stayed buried a long time ago." His words carried the weight of lived experience, each syllable carefully chosen. We walked past oil paintings of the hotel's founding fathers, their eyes seeming to follow our progress through gilt-framed portraits. The corridors stretched endlessly in both directions, lined with doors that seemed to watch us pass like sleeping eyes. "You ever wonder why they pay us so well for what amounts to babysitting an empty building?" Bobby continued, pausing to straighten a crooked picture frame. "It's because we ain't just employees here, kid. We're custodians, guardians of something that most people wouldn't understand, even if you explained it to them." That first night, I watched him deliver champagne to room 847 with the reverence of a priest conducting midnight mass. We took the elevator into the 8th floor in complete silence, the brass doors reflecting our tired faces like funhouse mirrors. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions, carpeted in deep burgundy that muffled our footsteps. Antique sconces provided dim lighting that cast dancing shadows along the wallpapered walls. Bobby approached room 847 with measured steps, carrying the bottle of champagne like it contained liquid gold. The bottle itself was dusty with age, its label written in French script that spoke of vineyards and harvest years from another era. He knocked 3 times, sharp, deliberate raps that echoed down the empty hallway like gunshots. The sound seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have, reverberating off the walls with supernatural persistence. The door never opened. No voice called out from inside. No footsteps approached from within the room. But when Bobby set the bottle down on the burgundy carpet and we turned toward the elevator, I made the mistake of glancing back over my shoulder. The bottle was gone, vanished as completely as if it had never existed. In its place was a small white card that read, "Thank you," in the same elegant cursive as the rulebook. "Who's in there?" I whispered as we descended back to the lobby, my voice barely audible over the elevator's mechanical humming. Bobby's laugh turned into a violent coughing fit that left him gasping for breath and clutching the brass handrail for support. When he finally recovered, he wiped his eyes with a stained handkerchief that had seen better decades. "Nobody who's supposed to be, kid. Nobody who should still be walking around anyway." The elevator descended through floors of sleeping guests, each level representing millions of dollars in real estate and untold stories of human ambition. But something about the 8th floor felt different from the others, colder, more oppressive, as if the very air carried the weight of unfinished business. At exactly 1:33 a.m., the antique phone at the concierge desk began ringing. The sound was different from modern phones, deeper, more resonant, like a church bell tolling in the distance. The phone itself was a beautiful piece of craftsmanship from the hotel's golden age, all polished brass and ivory handles that belonged in a museum rather than a working establishment. Bobby answered on the 3rd ring, his voice taking on a formal quality I hadn't heard before. The transformation was remarkable. His usual rough demeanor melted away, replaced by the professional courtesy of a bygone era. "Avalon Continental, 1949. I could hear a woman's voice on the other end, speaking in rapid French with desperate urgency. The words tumbled over each other like water rushing downstream, too fast for me to catch individual phrases. But the emotion behind them was unmistakable. Terror, desperation, and a mother's love stretched beyond the boundaries of death itself. The conversation lasted exactly 30 seconds, marked by the grandfather clock in the corner, whose golden pendulum swung with metronomic precision. Bobby listened without interruption, his weathered face growing paler with each passing moment. When the voice finally stopped, he hung up without saying goodbye, his hand trembling slightly as he replaced the receiver. "What did she say?" I asked, my curiosity getting the better of my caution. Bobby lit another cigarette with hands that shook like autumn leaves. The flame from his lighter cast dancing shadows across his weathered face, highlighting every line and wrinkle earned through decades of nocturnal employment. "Same thing she said every night for 2 decades, kid. The fire is spreading. Save the children. Please, someone save my children." He took a long drag and exhaled slowly, the smoke curling towards the ornate ceiling like incense. "There ain't been no fire here since 1949. The second week of training passed in a blur of strange rituals and unexplained phenomena. Bobby showed me every corner of the hotel, from the opulent guest floors to the utilitarian service areas where the real work happened. The building was a maze of corridors and hidden passages, some designed for guests and others meant only for staff who knew the hotel's deepest secrets. He taught me how to operate the freight elevator manually, his gnarled hands working the ancient controls with practiced ease. The elevator car groaned and shuddered as it moved between floors, cables singing in the darkness above us like violin strings played by invisible musicians. The manual controls were brass levers, worn smooth by countless hands, each one requiring precise pressure and timing to function properly. "Automatic controls go haywire after midnight," Bobby explained, though he wouldn't elaborate on why when I pressed for details. Something about the electrical systems in old buildings. They remember things they shouldn't, store up energy that don't belong in this world. The basement was a labyrinth of storage rooms and mechanical equipment, where massive boilers provided heat for 52 floors of luxury accommodations. Steam pipes snaked along the ceiling like metallic serpents, hissing and clanking with the rhythm of the hotel's mechanical heartbeat. It was here that Bobby showed me the janitor's closet containing the special cleaning solution, a clear liquid in an unmarked bottle that gave off fumes sharp enough to make my eyes water. "Only use this for the Thursday night cleaning," he warned, handling the bottle like it contained concentrated acid. "Don't get it on your skin, don't breathe too much of the vapor, and whatever you do, don't use it for anything else. This stuff was mixed special, according to a recipe that's older than both of us combined." On my final training night, we encountered the bellhop in the grey uniform. I was restocking towels in the supply closet when Bobby grabbed my arm with surprising strength, his fingers digging into my flesh hard enough to leave bruises. "There," he whispered, pointing down the hallway with a trembling finger. "You see him?" A figure in an old-fashioned bellhop uniform stood near the elevator bank, his back turned toward us. The uniform was grey instead of the hotel's standard navy blue, made from fabric that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Something about the way he stood, perfectly still, unnaturally straight, made my stomach clench with dread. No living person could maintain such perfect posture without even the slightest movement or sway. Bobby approached him slowly, pulling a glass of water from the hospitality station with movements careful enough for handling explosives. The bellhop turned as we got closer, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from crying out. His face was pale as parchment, with dark circles under his eyes that looked like bruises. His features held a timeless quality, as if death had frozen him at the exact moment of his passing. When he smiled, his expression held infinite sadness and a gratitude that transcended the boundaries between life and death. His eyes focused on something beyond our physical presence, seeing perhaps the hotel as it had been decades ago when he still drew breath. "Sir," Bobby said politely, offering the glass with the formal courtesy of a seasoned professional. "Compliments of the management." The bellhop nodded gratefully and accepted the water with hands that cast no shadow. He drank it in one long swallow, his throat working despite the impossibility of his existence. When he handed back the empty glass, his fingers were cold as winter air and left no fingerprints on the crystal surface. Before I could blink, he faded away like smoke dispersing in a breeze, leaving only the faint scent of burned wood hanging in the air. The smell lingered for several minutes, mixing with the hotel's usual aroma of expensive cleaning products and fresh flowers. "Who was that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Thomas Gray," Bobby replied, pocketing the glass with the same care he'd shown in offering it. "Been dead since 1949, but he don't seem to know it. Poor bastard still thinks he's got work to do, still trying to help folks who ain't been breathing for 75 years. The story Bobby told me that night would haunt my dreams for weeks to come. Thomas Gray had been a model employee, the kind of bellhop who anticipated guests' needs before they voiced them. He'd worked double shifts during the busy holiday season, earning extra money to buy Christmas presents for his younger sister back in Ohio. When the fire started, he could have escaped easily. His shift had ended hours earlier, and he was only in the building to collect his final paycheck. Instead, he'd run toward the danger, taking the service elevator to the penthouse where a dozen children were trapped by flames and smoke. The elevator had broken down between floors, leaving him trapped in a metal cage as fire consumed the upper levels. They'd found his body 3 days later, still clutching a glass of water he'd been bringing to comfort the frightened children. By week 3, I was flying solo on the night shift. The hotel felt different without Bobby's protective presence, larger and more menacing in the small hours when darkness pressed against the windows like a living thing. The rules had become muscle memory, but the hotel was teaching me new lessons every night. Each shift brought fresh horrors that tested my resolve and challenged my understanding of reality itself. The Rose Garden restaurant incident happened during my 4th solo shift. I was running behind schedule on my security rounds, and the logical part of my brain suggested cutting through the restaurant to save time. The detour would shave at least 5 minutes off my route, time I desperately needed to complete the champagne delivery before the 11:45 deadline. It was 2:19 a.m. when I pushed through the ornate glass doors, completely forgetting the rule about avoiding the restaurant during those specific minutes. The moment I stepped inside, the temperature dropped to 20 degrees, and my breath came out in visible puffs like I'd walked into a freezer. Every table was suddenly occupied by diners in 1940s formal wear. Men in tailored suits and women in elegant gowns sat frozen like department store mannequins, their faces hidden in deep shadow. Crystal glasses caught the light from chandeliers that hadn't been illuminated moments before, casting rainbow patterns across white tablecloths that seemed to glow with their own inner light. They all turned toward me, in perfect unison, their heads moving with mechanical precision that defied human anatomy. The silence was deafening. No conversation, no clinking silverware, no ambient restaurant sounds. Just the thundering of my own heartbeat and the rasp of my panicked breathing in the supernatural quiet. I could see their eyes now, reflecting the chandelier light like mirrors. Some of the diners were missing pieces. A woman with half her face burned away. A man whose tuxedo was soaked with blood that never dried. They were the victims of various tragedies that had befallen the hotel over its long history, condemned to replay their final moments for eternity. I stumbled backward through the doors, nearly falling in my haste to escape. When I looked through the windows from the safety of the hallway, the restaurant was empty again. Chairs stacked on tables just as they should be, but I could still feel their eyes watching me, waiting for the next fool who might disturb their eternal gathering. The bellhop in the grey uniform appeared twice more over the following weeks. The first encounter went smoothly. I offered him water as instructed, and he simply nodded before fading away like morning mist. His gratitude was palpable, a warmth that lingered in the air long after his form disappeared. The second time, however, I hesitated. He looked so normal, so human, that for a moment I forgot he wasn't supposed to exist. The fluorescent lighting made his pale skin appear almost lifelike, and his uniform looked freshly pressed despite being worn by a dead man for 7 decades. "Are you all right?" I asked, genuine concern overriding protocol. "Do you need help with anything?" He smiled at me then, an expression of gratitude that made him look almost alive. For a brief moment, I could see the young man he'd been, eager to please, dedicated to his work, full of dreams and ambitions that death had cut short. But when he opened his mouth to speak, the sound that emerged wasn't words. It was the screaming of children, high-pitched wails of terror and pain that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sound filled the hallway, bouncing off the walls and ceiling, until I thought my eardrums might burst. It was the sound of innocence being consumed by flames, of lives ended too soon by someone else's negligence. I ran to get the water, my feet slipping on the polished marble in my panic. The screaming followed me down the corridor, growing louder and more desperate with each step. By the time I returned with the glass, he was gone, leaving only the echo of those terrible screams ringing in my ears, and the lingering scent of smoke. Thursday nights were the absolute worst part of my job. At exactly 2:44 a.m, blood would appear on the marble floor of the main lobby. Not a few drops or a small stain, but a substantial pool that spread across the pristine stone like spilled wine. The pattern was always identical, droplets leading from the elevator bank to the front desk, then expanding into that horrible crimson lake. The first time I witnessed it, I thought someone had been injured. I looked around frantically for the victim, checking behind pillars and under furniture for someone who might need medical attention. But the lobby was empty, except for me and the spreading pool of blood that defied every law of physics and biology I thought I understood. The special cleaning solution was kept in an unmarked bottle in the basement janitor's closet, hidden behind rolls of toilet paper and boxes of cleaning supplies. The liquid was clear as water but gave off fumes that made my eyes stream and my head spin with dizziness. When it touched the blood, it bubbled and hissed like acid eating through metal, producing a smell that reminded me of burning hair and sulfur. The cleaning process took nearly an hour each Thursday night, working on my hands and knees with brushes and rags, while the chemical reaction slowly dissolved the supernatural stain. The blood fought back, seeming to resist removal as if it had its own will to exist. Sometimes I could swear I heard whispers coming from the dissolving puddle, voices speaking in languages I didn't recognize. I started keeping a personal journal of everything I witnessed, trying to piece together the hotel's dark history, like a detective working a cold case. The patterns were becoming clearer with each passing night, and one date kept appearing in my research like a recurring nightmare. 1949. Always 1949. During my days off, I haunted the public library and newspaper archives, digging through decades of yellowed newspapers and forgotten records. The Avalon Continental's official history was sanitized corporate fluff about architectural awards and celebrity guests, but the old newspapers told a very different story, one written in tragedy and sealed with blood. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, became my reluctant ally in this historical excavation. She'd worked at the library for 40 years and remembered when the hotel fires had been front-page news rather than forgotten footnotes. "You're not the first person to come asking about that place," she told me one afternoon, her voice dropping to a whisper, as if the very walls might be listening. Every few years, someone comes in here, digging through the old papers, trying to understand what happened up there. Most of them stop coming after a few weeks. The smart ones, anyway. The New York Herald, December 16th, 1949. Hotel fire kills 12. Children's Christmas party ends in tragedy. The article described how a fire had started in the Rose Garden restaurant during a holiday party for the hotel staff's children. 12 kids had died, trapped in the penthouse suite where they'd been watching a Christmas movie while their parents worked late shifts to accommodate the hotel's holiday guests. The hotel's sprinkler system had malfunctioned due to frozen pipes, and the elevators had stopped working when the electrical system overloaded, leaving the children with no way to escape the spreading flames. The details were horrific in their specificity. The children had ranged in age from 6 to 14, sons and daughters of maids, cooks, doormen, and other service staff who'd been promised a special treat while their parents earned overtime pay during the hotel's busiest season. They'd been watching It's a Wonderful Life on a borrowed projector when the fire started 3 floors below. A bellhop named Thomas Gray had died trying to save them, suffocating in the smoke-filled stairwell as he attempted to reach the penthouse. His body was found clutching a glass of water he'd been bringing to calm the frightened children, his final act one of compassion, even as death claimed him. The fire had been caused by faulty wiring in the restaurant's kitchen, where Christmas dinner preparations had overloaded circuits that hadn't been updated since the hotel's construction. What should have been a minor electrical problem became a catastrophe due to negligent maintenance and cost-cutting measures. 3 days after the fire, the hotel's owner, Margaret Ashford, had committed suicide in room 847. She left behind a bottle of 1952 champagne, her birth year, and a handwritten note saying she would make sure they're never forgotten. Her body was found by housekeeping, dressed in her finest evening gown as if prepared for a formal dinner party that would never come. The suicide note, reprinted in its entirety by the Herald, was a rambling confession of guilt and a promise of eternal penance. Margaret blamed herself for the cost-cutting measures that had made the tragedy possible, for prioritizing profits over safety, for trusting others to maintain standards she should have enforced personally. I cannot live knowing that 12 innocent souls perished due to my negligence, the note read. I will spend eternity ensuring their memory is preserved, that their suffering is acknowledged, that their spirits find the peace that I have stolen from them. Let this hotel stand as a monument to my failure and their innocence. Everything clicked into place like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, finally revealing their complete picture. The rules weren't random protocols designed to torment night shift workers. They were memorials, tributes to the dead that kept their spirits from becoming something far worse than melancholy ghosts. The champagne delivery honoured Margaret Ashford's final wishes, a nightly reminder of her commitment to remembrance. The phone call was her desperate attempt to warn about the fire that had already claimed 12 innocent lives, her spirit trapped in an endless loop of maternal panic. The lights in the lobby recreated the safety the children had been seeking when the flames trapped them upstairs, a beacon that should have guided them to salvation. Even the blood on Thursday nights marked the exact time when the first victim had succumbed to smoke inhalation, a 14-year-old boy named Michael, who tried to lead the younger children to safety before being overcome by toxic fumes. Armed with this knowledge, I returned to work with a newfound respect for the rules. They weren't arbitrary commands from management. They were sacred rituals that maintained a delicate balance between the living and the dead. Each protocol served as a bridge between past and present, ensuring that tragedy would not be forgotten or repeated. I began performing my duties with the reverence they deserved, understanding that I wasn't just a night auditor, but a keeper of memories. a guardian of souls who had no other advocates in the world of the living. The hotel felt different now, less menacing and more melancholy, like a vast mausoleum where the dead waited patiently for their stories to be acknowledged. It was a Friday night in my 6th week when everything changed. I'd grown comfortable, perhaps too comfortable, with the routine. The hotel had become my second home, its corridors as familiar as my own apartment. I knew every creak and groan of the old building, every shadow that belonged, and every sound that signalled normalcy. The champagne delivery to room 847 had gone smoothly that night. Margaret Ashford's spirit had accepted her weekly tribute with the usual silent gratitude, the bottle disappearing with the supernatural efficiency I'd come to expect. I'd even received one of her thank you cards, written in that elegant cursive that belonged to another era. The mysterious phone call had arrived precisely at 1:33 a.m, and I'd answered with the required words before hanging up on that desperate French voice. Tonight's message had been particularly heartbreaking. A mother's voice calling out individual names, pleading for someone to save Michael, Sarah, Jennifer, Thomas, and 8 other children who'd been dead for 75 years. I'd completed most of my rounds with mechanical precision, checking doors, adjusting thermostats, and ensuring that the hotel's few overnight guests were sleeping peacefully. The building felt calm, almost serene, as if the spirits were satisfied with my dedication to their memory. At 2:42 a.m, I was in the basement stocking supplies when I heard the sound that always made my blood run cold. Children laughing from the direction of the pool area. The sound drifted down through the ventilation system, innocent and joyful in a way that made it infinitely more terrifying. It was the sound of children at play, completely unaware that death was stalking them through smoke-filled corridors. The rule was crystal clear. Immediately go to the lobby and turn on every single light. The children's spirits were reliving their final moments of happiness before the fire consumed them, and the lights served as a beacon of safety they'd never reached in life. But I was 4 floors underground, and the old elevator was notoriously slow. In my mind, I could picture those ghostly children growing impatient, their laughter turning to something darker and more dangerous with each passing second. I made a decision that felt logical in that moment of panic, a choice that would haunt me for the brief remainder of my existence. Instead of taking precious time to reach the lobby, I found the master electrical panel mounted on the basement wall. The metal box was old and rusted, filled with switches labelled in faded handwriting from decades past. I flipped every switch I could find, flooding the basement, ground floor, and second floor with brilliant light simultaneously. Fluorescent tubes hummed to life overhead, casting harsh white illumination across concrete walls and storage shelves. Emergency lighting activated throughout the building, creating a constellation of safety that should have satisfied any reasonable interpretation of the rule. It should have had the same effect as turning on the lobby lights, right? Light was light, regardless of which switches controlled it. The children would see the illumination and know they were safe, that someone was watching over them even in death. The laughing stopped immediately. Too immediately. The sudden silence felt wrong, like the moment of perfect quiet that comes just before thunder follows lightning. It was the silence of held breath, of anticipation, of something fundamental shifting in the cosmic balance that governed the hotel's supernatural ecosystem. I stood there in the buzzing, fluorescent glare, congratulating myself on my problem-solving skills. I'd honoured the spirit of the rule while adapting to the circumstances, showing initiative and practical thinking that any reasonable employer would appreciate. Surely that counted for something, in whatever cosmic ledger kept track of these supernatural obligations. But as minutes passed, I began to realise that the hotel's electrical system was behaving strangely. Lights I'd turned on were flickering off and on in patterns that looked almost like Morse code, spelling out messages I couldn't decipher. The rhythm was too deliberate to be random, too complex to be mere electrical malfunction. The elevator had stopped responding to calls, its brass doors sealed shut like the entrance to a tomb. When I pressed the call button, nothing happened. No mechanical whirring, no indicator lights, no response whatsoever. I tried the manual release that Bobby had shown me, but even that failed to function. And then I heard it, children's voices drifting through the walls themselves, but they weren't laughing anymore. They were crying, wailing with the desperate anguish of souls who'd been abandoned once again by the living world they trusted to remember them. The sound was coming from everywhere at once. The walls, the ceiling, the floors beneath my feet. 12 distinct voices, each one calling for help, calling for their parents, calling for someone to save them from the fire that had claimed their lives 75 years ago. The crying grew louder and more desperate, building to a crescendo of anguish that threatened to drive me to my knees. I ran for the stairwell, taking the concrete steps 3 at a time in my desperation to escape the basement. But something was wrong with the building's geometry. Each floor I climbed seemed to take me further down instead of up, as if the hotel was reshaping itself around me like a living maze. The stairwells stretched endlessly in both directions, a concrete labyrinth with no beginning and no end. The walls were covered with children's drawings, crayon pictures of Christmas trees and Santa Claus that hadn't been there moments before. Some of the drawings were burned at the edges and others were stained with small handprints in soot and ash. I'd been supposed to go to the lobby first to follow the exact sequence that honoured their memory properly. The lights in the lobby weren't just any lights. They were the same fixtures that had been burning on that terrible night in 1949, when 12 children had run down from the penthouse seeking safety that would never come. Those specific lights held meaning beyond their mere illumination. They were the beacons the children had seen as they fled the smoke and flames, the promise of sanctuary that death had stolen from them. By substituting other lights, I'd broken the sacred connection between memory and reality, severing the delicate thread that kept their spirits at peace. Instead, I treated their tragedy like a technical problem to be solved efficiently. I'd prioritized convenience over ceremony, logic over love, and in doing so had committed the ultimate sacrilege against their memory. The dead don't want innovation. They want remembrance, exact and unchanging, performed with the reverence their suffering deserves. The temperature began dropping rapidly, my breath coming out in visible puffs as supernatural cold invaded the stairwell. Frost formed on the concrete walls, creating patterns that looked like reaching hands and desperate faces. The children's crying grew louder, more accusatory, as if they understood that once again the living had failed them. I could hear other sounds now. The crackle of flames, the groan of buckling metal, the desperate pounding of small fists against doors that would never open. The hotel was showing me what had happened that night, forcing me to experience the terror and helplessness of children trapped by adult negligence and corporate greed. The last thing I remember clearly was reaching what should have been the lobby, but finding myself instead in a smoke-filled recreation room decorated for Christmas, 1949. Tinsel hung from the ceiling like silver spiderwebs, and a decorated tree stood in the corner, its lights twinkling through the haze like dying stars. 12 children sat in a circle around an old film projector, their faces turned toward me, with expressions of infinite sadness. They were exactly as I'd imagined them from the newspaper descriptions. Boys in suspenders and girls in party dresses, their clothing singed at the edges from flames that had consumed them decades ago. Their eyes held the terrible wisdom that comes only from experiencing death too young, a knowledge that no child should ever possess. The youngest was a girl who couldn't have been more than 6, her blonde hair tied with red ribbons that had been white before the fire. She clutched a teddy bear that was missing one arm, its fur blackened by smoke but still recognizable as a beloved companion. Next to her sat two boys who were clearly brothers, their matching sailor suits torn and stained with soot. "You were supposed to remember us the right way," said a girl in a green velvet dress, her voice carrying the weight of 7 decades of waiting. She was perhaps 10 years old, with dark eyes that reflected depths of sorrow no living child could comprehend. "The lights in the lobby. That's where we ran when the fire started. That's where we were supposed to be safe." I tried to explain that I'd turned on lights, that I'd followed the spirit of the rule, if not the letter. My words tumbled out in a desperate rush, apologies and justifications, mixing together in a stream of panic. I told them about the basement, about the electrical panel, about my logical decision to illuminate the entire building, rather than just the lobby. But rules born from tragedy don't care about efficiency or innovation. They exist to honor the dead exactly as they need to be honored, in the precise way that keeps their pain from consuming the living. The children listened to my explanations with the patient sadness of souls who'd heard similar excuses before. "We waited for the lights," said one of the boys, his voice hollow as wind through empty rooms. "Every night we wait for the lights that mean someone remembers what happened to us. But you gave us the wrong lights, in the wrong place, at the wrong time." The oldest child, a boy of perhaps 14, who'd been the group's leader in life, stepped forward with the solemn dignity of someone forced to grow up too fast. "Michael Patterson," he said, introducing himself with formal politeness that broke my heart. "I was supposed to take care of them. I was supposed to get them out." I recognized the name from the newspaper articles. Michael had been the first victim, overcome by smoke while trying to guide the younger children to safety. He died a hero's death, but that knowledge couldn't ease the guilt that bound his spirit to this place. "We tried to reach the lobby," Michael continued, his words measured and careful. "When the fire started, we ran down the stairs, just like we'd been taught in fire drills. But the smoke was so thick and the younger ones were scared. We could see the lights in the lobby through the smoke. They were like stars showing us the way home." The little girl with the teddy bear began to cry, transparent tears streaming down her ethereal cheeks. "The lights went out before we could reach them," she whispered. "Everything went dark, and then we couldn't breathe anymore." I understood now with crystal clarity. The lobby lights weren't just illumination. They were the last thing these children had seen before death claimed them, the final beacon of hope in their brief lives. By substituting other lights, I'd invalidated their sacrifice, suggesting that any light would do for their memory. The smoke grew thicker around me, filling my lungs with the phantom fire that had claimed these children so long ago. I could feel the hotel claiming me as its newest permanent resident, another soul bound to its dark history by the weight of good intentions gone horribly wrong. "We're not angry," said the girl in the green dress, her voice growing fainter as the smoke obscured her form. "We're just tired of being forgotten wrong. The people who came before you, they understood. They lit the right lights in the right place because that's what we needed." Through the thickening haze, I could see the other night auditors who'd worked at the hotel before me. They stood at the edges of the room like sentinels, each one wearing the same expression of regret and understanding. Some I recognized from old employee photos in the break room, workers who'd simply disappeared one night, leaving behind only empty uniforms and unanswered questions. Bobby Hendricks stood among them, still wearing his maintenance uniform but looking younger somehow, as if death had lifted the burden of years from his shoulders. He nodded at me, with something that might have been sympathy or perhaps welcome. "I tried to teach you," he said, his voice carrying across impossible distances. "But some lessons can only be learned through experience. The hotel don't make exceptions, even for good intentions." The children began to fade as consciousness left me, their forms becoming translucent against the smoky backdrop of their eternal Christmas party. but their voices remained clear, speaking in unison with the harmony of a heavenly choir. "Now you understand," they said. "Now you can help us remember the right way. Every night at 2:42, when you hear us laughing, you'll know to turn on the lobby lights. The right lights. The ones that mean we're safe." As the recreation room dissolved around me, and eternal darkness claimed my vision, I realized that death at the Avalon Continental wasn't an ending. It was a promotion. I graduated from employee to guardian, from night auditor to eternal custodian of memories that must never be allowed to fade. The hotel had claimed another caretaker, someone who understood the true cost of forgetting and the sacred responsibility of remembrance. My body would be found in the morning, another mysterious death that would be explained away by stress and overwork, but my spirit would remain bound to the Burgundy Journal and the 10 rules that govern the boundary between life and death. Somewhere in the distance, growing fainter with each passing second, I could hear a phone beginning to ring at exactly 1:33 a.m. Soon it would be my turn to answer, my voice joining the chorus of the dead who protected the living from horrors they couldn't comprehend. The children's laughter echoed around me one last time, but now I understood its true meaning. It wasn't the sound of the damned, it was the sound of the remembered, souls given purpose through the devotion of those who refused to let their stories end with death, and in that understanding I found a peace I'd never known in life. The Avalon Continental had given me something more valuable than any salary. It had given me a reason to exist beyond death, a mission that would last for eternity. The rules would continue to be followed, exactly as written, forever and always. Because some things are too important to be improved upon, too sacred to be streamlined, too precious to be forgotten. In the lobby far above, the antique clocks resumed their ticking, marking time for the living, while the dead began another night of eternal vigil. The hotel slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that its guardians were watching, waiting, and remembering. And when the next night auditor was hired, because there would always be another night auditor, they would receive the same Burgundy Journal, read the same 10 rules, and face the same choice between convenience and reverence. Most would choose wisely, some would choose poorly. But the hotel would endure, as it always had, as it always would, a monument to the truth that some debts can only be paid with remembrance, and some memories demand nothing less than perfection in their preservation. The dead have all the time in the world to wait for their stories to be told correctly. And at the Avalon Continental, they had found the perfect place to do their waiting, surrounded by those who understood that the past is never truly past. It's just waiting for the right person to turn on the right lights in the right place at the right time. Forever and always, exactly as written in the Burgundy Journal that passed from hand to hand, from the living to the dead, carrying with it the weight of memory and the promise of eternal service. The rules were simple, the consequences were absolute, and the hotel would continue its watch, guarding secrets that the world was better off not knowing, protected by those who'd learned too late that some traditions exist for reasons far more important than mere superstition. In the end, we all serve something greater than ourselves. At the Avalon Continental, that something was memory itself. And memory, as I'd learned, has very specific requirements for how it chooses to be served.